Indonesia has had an overlooked impact on human history. From fast shifts in the global climate, changes to North America's population distribution, the development of the modern financial markets, to even the creation of a new religion with millions of followers. Indonesia has either been at the center of it or indirectly caused it, and its influence on the world is likely to grow. I'll go ahead and start with the most insane way Indonesia has affected human history. 74,000 years ago, a volcano erupted in what would become Indonesia and nearly killed everyone on the planet. What was at the time Mount Toba and is now Lake Toba blew 2,800 cubic kilometers of debris into the atmosphere, dimming the sun, which caused a 10-year volcanic winter, destroying food sources across the planet. One study claims that there was as few as 40 human breeding pairs left on Earth, though some say this number is quite exaggerated, and the number was probably somewhere between 1,000 to 10,000 breeding pairs. I wish I could report that this was the only volcano within Indonesia that has caused human suffering, but even today, Indonesia has the most active volcanoes of any country in the world, because it's sitting right on the Ring of Fire. I could go on for days about deadly volcanoes on this archipelago, but I'll just mention one more notable eruption. In 1815, Mount Tambora erupted, causing what is known as the Year Without a Summer. The numbers aren't exactly clear, but it's believed by some historians that the volcano killed millions across Europe and Asia due to crop failures and disease. This volcano, indirectly, had quite a cultural impact. There wasn't enough food for horses, which resulted in the first generations of the bicycle being invented. Paintings became more depressing, and the color red was used more often. A similar thing actually happened after the 1883 Krakatoa eruption, also in Indonesia. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and The Vampire by John William Polidori were probably written because of the volcano. Frankenstein needs no explanation, but The Vampire was the first modern vampire story and what sparked the vampire genre. The group of writers on vacation in Switzerland were forced inside by bad weather, and so Lord Byron held a contest to see who could write the scariest story. The volcano even changed the population distribution of the United States. Temperatures became intolerable for many New Englanders, so they migrated to the Northwest Territory, which resulted in Indiana becoming a state in 1816 and Illinois just 2 years later. Thousands migrated to western New York as well. It's been suggested that these migrants, coming from anti-slavery states, helped push the state of New York to ban slavery in 1827, the last northern state to do so. One of these migrants, coming from Vermont to New York, was 11-year-old Joseph Smith. The story goes that in 1817, Smith walked to Palmyra, New York, through 40 miles of snow a day for 3 to 4 weeks, after being forced from his wagon to make room for others. I should note that this was in the summer. The region he moved to became known as the Burned Over District because of its fast-moving wave of Christian revivalism during the Second Great Awakening that moved like a forest fire sweeping through. Immersed in the religious excitement, Joseph Smith's experiences led to his founding of Mormonism. After Smith died, the religion's new leader, Brigham Young, settled in the area that is now the state of Utah. Today, just over half of Utah's population of 3.3 million is Mormon, and the total membership of the Mormon Church tops 17 million. Before I share the next examples of how Indonesia has shaped human history, I want to thank today's sponsor. They are who make these videos possible, so thank you BetterHelp for sponsoring this video. I could probably use therapy right now. Between making YouTube videos full-time, a part-time job in the Army, a full load of graduate-level courses, and a newborn, life is kind of stressful right now. I'm somehow managing, I think, but I could probably use some more stress and time management skills, which BetterHelp can help with. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and you simply fill out a few questions and you're matched with a professional therapist in as little as a few days. BetterHelp can give you tools to approach your life in a different way, whether you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just going through a hard time, or you're like me and just need help finding ways to manage stress. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible. And this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to options in your area. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/geographygeek. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And if the therapist isn't a great fit, you can easily switch. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/geographygeek. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for sponsoring this video. I've been using the name Indonesia kind of loosely in this video, because everything I've talked about so far was before a modern state existed, or it was actually the Dutch East Indies, a colony of the Netherlands. Indonesia as a sovereign state exists because of this colonization. There are more than 700 languages spoken in Indonesia, and more than 1,300 ethnic groups spread out over 6,000 inhabited islands, as well as 3 religions with a majority population in sizable geographic areas. It's honestly quite impressive that this country is so united today. But anyway, the Netherlands colonized Indonesia initially for its spices, but it eventually evolved into other commodities like coffee and sugar. This was done through the first publicly traded company, the Dutch East India Company, also known as the VOC. The company, founded in 1602, made the Netherlands extremely rich. One estimate has the company worth the modern equivalent of $8 trillion. That's more than the value of Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon combined, though this number has been disputed. The Dutch have had a huge influence on the culture of the Western world. I've made an entire playlist on how Dutch culture had a larger impact on the US than is typically realized. This matters because a large reason the Netherlands became a global power and was so influential was because of the colonization of the East Indies. Now, this wasn't the Netherlands' only source of wealth. It wasn't even the largest. The country actually obtained more through the trade with Poland and the Baltic states. But it was extremely significant. It financed fleets that would rule the seas for decades and sparked the creation of the stock market. Many of Amsterdam's old canals and canal houses were financed by the trade in the East Indies. This colonization also resulted in a better understanding of the world's geography for Europeans. And I'm a small drop in the bucket, but a significant part of my income is covering maps that were funded by the VOC or created using VOC maps. Indonesians were relatively accepting of the Dutch at first. The Dutch were much more tolerant of the locals' religious beliefs compared to the Spanish and Portuguese. But Dutch liberalism often only applied when it was practical, especially when it was up to a company whose only goal was profit, and a government to keep it accountable was on the other side of the world. For example, take a look at Rune Island, the most western of the Banda Islands. The island had changed hands between the English and Dutch a few times in the first half of the 17th century, and so to prevent the English from setting up post again, the Dutch killed or enslaved all of the island's adult men, exiled the women and children, and chopped down every nutmeg tree on the island. The VOC only allowed cattle to roam free on Rune. This was to provide food for the rest of the Banda Islands, which were also massacred. It's unclear how many people were killed, but it's estimated that the Banda Islands population dropped from about 14,000 to 1,000 by the end of the Dutch conquest. But I bring Rune Island up for another historic bullet point. It was included in the trade for New York. It was given to England at the conclusion of the First Anglo-Dutch War, but the Dutch negotiated its return at the end of the Second Anglo-Dutch War. At the time, the Netherlands believed Rune Island and Suriname were of greater economic importance than New York. Now on to human history as a species. In 2003, the remains of what has been nicknamed the Hobbit after the Lord of the Rings race were discovered in a cave on the island of Flores. The Hobbit would have stood at 1.1 meters or 3 feet 7 inches. It's unclear exactly how old the Hobbit is. The layer of sediment the remains were found in was between 60,000 and 100,000 years old, but artifacts, likely from the same species, are believed to be between 50,000 and 190,000 years old. This is even more significant because it's unclear where it fits into the human evolutionary tree. Another notable piece of human history: in 2017, an Indonesian man died at what he and the Indonesian government claimed to be 146 years old, making him the oldest recorded person by 24 years. However, no independent sources have verified the claim. Today, 78 years after Indonesia declared its independence, it's the fourth most populated country in the world, and its population is still rising. Indonesia's economy is quickly growing, and it looks like in just a couple of years it will pass Russia for the sixth highest GDP. Its visibility on the world stage is long overdue, but it's finally claiming its place. It has disputes in the South China Sea, a region that is ranked amongst the most likely places to spark the next major conflict. China and Indonesia have tense encounters, but in general, Indonesia appears to downplay disputes with China, at least for now. This is likely because of strong economic ties with China. Earlier this year, Indonesia signed an agreement with Vietnam over maritime boundaries, a step in strengthening the region's maritime norms outlined in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which could lead to lasting peace. I expect Indonesia will continue to play a large role in our history, not because of its colonizers, and hopefully not because of volcanoes, but because it's a thriving sovereign nation asserting its position on the global stage. And that's all for this video. Thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube members, and thank you all for watching.